That's true, right? This is a problem we can observe. I don't think it caused this problem, at least not the agencies themselves, because I think the people who were investing the money knew that the ratings were lies. They weren't fooled. And I think we can document that in important cases. Nevertheless, the whole scheme, and partly this is a regulatory failure problem, where pension funds and so on have to buy ratings agency rated securities that are the best quality, has led to a government intervention into the market that has backfired. I think that's fixable too. Okay, so I am out of time, and I cede to Professor Oesterle.
They have the screen down, but they don't have the podium today, so I'd encourage you. I have 30 copies that I handed out, and I strongly encourage you to find somebody that you can look on with to get a hold of one of these, because you won't understand what I have to say without having access to the slides. So find somebody, if you've got some extra ones, look on with somebody else or something like that, so you have access to a copy of the slide. If you sit there without them, you're not getting any mind. So pizza's good, but you won't follow it. Nobody's moving. That's not good. Find somebody with a copy of the slides you can look up. Otherwise, you will not follow it. I only made 30 because I assumed the competency of the audiovisual folks. That only works when you're talking about common law. We could move to a classroom. I really had no idea what Dave was going to talk about. So I put a series of slides together, and if you look at the topic of the slides, you'll see that I put a very quick and dirty summary of the entire crisis together for you. That's why you really should have. The first slide says causes and cures. The second one talks about how the crisis broke. The third one talks about how we attempted some solutions. The next one talks about where we are now after the attempted solutions. The next one talks about comparison with the United States approach to the UK approach, because they've taken a radically different approach to their crisis than we have. I can get a little Oesterle opinion in that one. Then I talk about how difficult it is to argue this, because you've got to disprove the actual with the hypothetical, which is what we didn't do. And the last one I talk about the total effect of where we are, and it's kind of a doomsday scenario. It'll be very uplifting for you. I don't think I can go through all of this. I'll try to just hit the high spots and let you ask some questions. I do have some very major disagreements with Dave right off the bat, although when he gets into the regulatory side, I'm not really sure what he's advocating. So what little he said I disagree with, but I don't. I'll wait for some more of that. The critical slide is the first one, which talks about the causes of the economic crisis. And the major cause, in my view, step one there is we had cheap and easy loan money available. And that was not a market failure. That was a regulatory failure. The Fed did it. And the Republican Fed chairs did it. Bernanke did it, and the guy in front of it, what was his name? Trump? Forgot the guy with the funny nose? Greenspan. Greenspan and Bernanke gave us this crisis. They did. And they did because they kept interest rates artificially low for a long period of time. They did it in 97, 98. They did it in 2002 all the way up to 2008. And what they did was, by keeping interest rates artificially low, they subsidized debt in this country. It was a subsidy to debt, just like we have a subsidy to own electric cars. They subsidized debt. That's not a market failure. That's a regulatory failure. And by subsidizing debt, they increased risk-taking incentives. And they increased the misallocation of resources. And they created all sorts of perverse financial incentives for people in the market that people in the market were willing to. The banks wanted to borrow the money because it was so cheap, and they had to find somebody that they could loan it to. They needed to find a sucker base. And they sure did. They found it created a classic asset bubble. The asset bubble was created by the Fed. It was not market regulatory. David's already starting to say, look, the next Buckeye game will have no ticket takers. And we'll assume that people are going to be honest. So only honest people show up and take receipts. Sincerely yours, Gordon Gee. essentially what the Fed did in this crisis. And now David's criticizing the people that show up and took other people's seats, saying, calling the market failure. No, it isn't. It's regulatory. You should have ticket takers. Now, the first thing that you do when you've got cheap money is you got to find suckers. And I've given you the steps. They found suckers in 3 levels. The first sucker group that they found were real estate owners. Real estate's a stable asset. It's broadly owned. It's easy to borrow against. And the banks were very comfortable loaning money. So you started loaning a lot of money to people who owned or wanted to buy. Step 2, it's such a good gig, you needed to increase the velocity of the money. So you found another class of suckers. They were called derivative investors. Derivative investors came through securitization, where you recycled the loan money faster and faster through the securitization process so that you could take advantage of the spread in the rates quicker and quicker. And we got this whirlwind created by the securitization process. It also enabled us we needed to increase the asset base to keep the money flow going. So we needed more real estate to loan against, so we lowered the underwriting standards. The banks lowered the underwriting standards. Credit agencies went along. Congress and HUD went along because we like low-income home ownership. The third group of suckers is we had to find futures investors and insurance. So we artificially doubled or tripled the asset base by finding a group of people that would actually bet in the derivative markets for and against this asset class. The real suckers were on the long side. AIG, heard of them? They've got $150 billion a year money. They bet on the long side. Credit default swaps. Fannie and Freddie, heard of them? They've got maybe $300 billion a year money. They took bets on the long side. So you in essence, in the third sucker base, you found people that outside the original asset base were just making raw bets on the market using very sophisticated financial derivatives. And so we ended up with an asset bubble. It's a classic asset bubble. It's not one that's extraordinary. It happens over time when there's cheap money. And in fact, if we continue to have cheap money, which we do, we pretty much run the asset bubble through the real estate markets, we're going to find another asset bubble. It's going to be currency, or cars maybe, car loan. It's going to be something else. When you have cheap money on the table, it generates assets. Okay, slide 2, the crisis. Here's what happened. Borrowers got overextended, mortgage defaults increased, the asset values declined. That was step 1. Step 2, the people that were in the insurance market went broke. The people long in the insurance, they couldn't pay on the insurance policies. AIG went broke, Fannie and Freddie went broke. A lot of the banks that were long in this market started going broke. 3, worldwide investment funds holding securities that were tied to this market and securities in people who were in the market. Banks, Lehman, others. They had huge losses and big write-downs. Step 4, credit dried up everywhere. Nobody's going to loan money to anybody. Capital ratios fell at the banks because they had these big losses. Some of the banks, in essence, were illiquid and couldn't loan money because they were violating capital ratios. Other banks who had money wouldn't loan it because they didn't trust anybody. You could be a bank and go to another bank and ask for a couple of bucks of cash, and the banker that you were asking for, you say, I don't trust you. You're probably going to, I don't know. So banks stopped lending to each other in the interbank market rates, and then the commercial paper markets dried up, which is really the liquid behind all our trading markets. Commercial paper is short-term debt instruments of our top-ranked corporation. We had a commercial paper scare. People just stopped buying commercial paper, which meant you couldn't roll the commercial paper you were already floating, you couldn't meet payroll, brokers couldn't get loans to cash out trades. We really had, and when the commercial paper market went, that's when all our officials got together and said, we need to save the world somehow. We're going down. Commercial paper market's locked up. We're going down. And that's when they had these crisis meetings. Okay, the solution? Well, the Fed poured money into the system, and they did it in 4 or 5 ways. The one that I thought worked was that they guaranteed commercial paper, so the commercial paper markets opened up immediately. That was good. That's all they should have done. But then they kept going. They lowered interest rates. They've been agency that has China just apoplectic. They're just furious about this. They also bought the toxic securities from the banks to try to clean up their balance sheets. That's what the Fed did almost immediately. Then Congress got in, and Congress did all sorts of stuff. They empowered the Treasury and the Fed to use taxpayer dollars to buy American companies. We capitalized banks, insurance, and auto companies. We nationalized Fannie and Freddie, and basically what we did is we took the taxpayer dollars, we gave them to the companies, and the companies gave us back funny-looking convertible preferred stock and warrants. So the American government now has major equity positions in a lot of different companies. Then Congress passed stimulus legislation. We're going to spend our way out of this. It said it was about $800 billion, but like close to $1 trillion. $1 trillion of spending, some was tax cuts, some was money. They've done it really 3 times. Everybody focuses on the one big one, but there have been 3 other stimulus packages passed. There have probably been multiple others that I haven't caught. There's been at least 3 stimulus bills passed. Bush passed 1, and the rest have been Obama's. A big one and several small ones. The small one for small business, $30 billion, came out just a couple of weeks ago. So we've had multiple stimulus spending bills. And then my favorite, Treasury got in and said, we're going to fix the housing market. And they started housing modification, foreclosure programs and loan mortgage modification programs, and they've all been a spectacular failure. Peter Swire on our faculty engineered some of it. And Will Finn, he says it was a communications problem. All you communication people. That they needed to communicate their goals better. Yeah. Okay, the current result. Current result, if you look at the current result, unemployment's at 9.5 and holding, real estate prices continue to decline, record foreclosures and short sales still clog the market. People assume that we won't get a clearing price in the real estate market for another 2 years, which is disgraceful. The housing bust has frozen the labor market. You can't move for better jobs. We've got a record deficit of $1.3 trillion. We've got a record debt of $13 trillion, which is 92% of GDP and climbing. When you add unfunded liabilities, which give you a sort of a total debt of $30 trillion, the United States is officially, by all measures, all sensible measures, we are bankrupt. 100% of GDP is typically the measure of bankruptcy. We'll hit it with the official numbers by 2012. Unofficially, we're there now easily because of our unfunded liabilities and pensions and GDP fell a total of 4%. Current quarterly increases are averaging about 1.5%, which is pretty meager coming out of a recession. The recession was technically over in June, but the recovery has been really flat. Governments at every level in the country are showing record deficits. Public and private pension funds are all underfunded. Time is expired. Okay, we'll do it. In other words, we're still in the soup, big time. The next slide, which I don't have time to go through, the UK versus US slide, I'll just skip. How does one prove the actual with a hypothetical? I think you can do yourself. The total effects slide you may want to pay attention to because that affects you trying to get a job. We're broke. All debt in this country, private and public, is flowing up to the federal level. They're absorbing state debt, local government debt, and private debt in the companies that they bailed out. Growth is no longer a way out. That's the scary part. We cannot grow out of this any longer. There is no growth rate that will pay off these obligations. It will pay off the interest obligations on the debt we've incurred. Taxes are becoming impossible. Spending cuts will actually deter growth. So in my view, we only have 2 options. We can default on our obligations, or we can inflate our way out. We're going to inflate our way out. China's figured it out, and they're furious about it. QE2 is part of the inflation sort of way out that's coming, that has recently been announced. And China doesn't like the fact that they own a lot of our treasuries, and all of a sudden the treasuries aren't going to be worth much because we're going to inflate our way out of this crisis. The whole thing is a disaster. I think we're past the point of no return where sensible solutions work. In summary, this is not a market